Okay, cool. Let's get going. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to have this opportunity to kick off Voices 2021, as well as our panel discussion on metrics in building and internal communication strategy that really matters. I'm Jeff Corbin. I'm Senior Advisor for Internal Communications Consulting at Staffbase, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by a great and very distinguished panel of internal communications professionals. I thought that rather than me introducing each of our panelists, that maybe they could introduce themselves. So Priya, how do you feel about starting us off today?
No problem. I'm Priya Bates from Toronto, Canada. I'm president of Inner Strength Communication. It's an agency that focuses on internal communication, employee engagement, and change management here in Canada, but we have clients all over the world. Nice to be here today.
Awesome. I don't know how it shows up on everyone else's screen, but to your right appears to be Neil. So Neil, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Neil Griffiths. I'm based out of the United Kingdom. I've been communication professional for the better part of 20 years, spending most of those in internal comms, but not exclusively. Also worked across PR, brand marketing, and non-profit. For the past 3 years, been working to drive the diversity, equality, and inclusion agenda at ERM, where I'm now their global head. Big advocate for standards in professional communication. And I was involved in IBC's volunteer-led program to develop the global standard for professional communication. I'm an accredited business communicator, chartered PR practitioner, and an IBC fellow.
Awesome, welcome. I guess good afternoon, Neil. David, good morning to you.
Hi, Jeff, and hi, everyone. Glad to be with you. David Pietre here. I'm with Davis & Company. We're an agency that specializes in internal communication based in the US, here in New Jersey. And I lead the firm's consulting group and also lead our measurement practice. So happy to be with you. Back to you, Jeff.
Awesome. All right. So let's get this discussion going. We only have 45 minutes, so we'll do our best to get a lot of great information into a short period of time. Measurement is definitely a topic that gets a lot of air coverage in the internal communications industry. We spend a lot of time talking about its importance, not only to helping us as professionals evaluate and hopefully doing better in our work, but also demonstrating the value that we bring to business success and to our organization. So today we're going to once again broach this important topic, but with the goal of not just talking about why we should measure our work, but what we actually need to do. And I thought to set the foundation for our discussion, I could reminisce for just a moment about the nature of analytics for communications and how for decades we've handled measurement and demonstrating the value and success of our work. And I know that I'm probably going to date myself here, but for more than 20 years, nearly 30 years. And before joining Staffbase and before founding my own mobile app technology company, I ran a corporate communications consulting firm in New York City called KCSA Strategic Communications. And one of the things that I remember back then was having to rely on old school strategies and tactics to accomplish our objective of successfully getting information to communicating and engaging with our employees and other targeted audiences. And the key metric that we used to rely upon to demonstrate the effectiveness and hopefully the success of our work were these things called impressions. Remember them? The millions and millions of impressions that a piece of content that we created or generated achieved. And I used to always ask myself when I would see these large numbers, what constituted an impression and what did it really mean and what did it tell us? Did it provide us with any true indication of the extent to which a person was actually engaging with the content that we were trying to communicate with them, or to its effectiveness? And having found a mobile communications technology company, now working with Staffbase, I realized that the answer is not really. Cloud computing, software as a solution, SaaS solutions like Staffbase have changed this. The reason for this is that we can actually now see and actually know not only whether a person has opened a piece of content, but how long they've actually spent on it. We can understand the types of content, whether it be video content, short articles, longer articles, maybe posts with animated GIFs embedded in them. We can tell which types of content are engaged with more than others. We now have access to information and to data that allows us to continuously evaluate the effectiveness and the success of our work, and if necessary, to change our content creation strategies if what we're doing isn't working. So we no longer have to rely on impressions or on anecdotes or what we think based on our previous experiences. The reality is that the numbers say everything, and when they are surrounded by the right commentary, they don't lie. So with this as a backdrop, let's get our conversation going to hear our panel's thoughts on measurement, on metrics, and delivering tangible results as part of the work that we do in internal communications. I've had the opportunity over the past couple of months to spend several hours with our panelists, and we've discussed topics and questions that we think are really at the forefront of the work that we do in internal communications, and could serve as a basis for questions to discuss today during this discussion. So, of course, if the audience has any questions, there is a chat box. Feel free to put your questions into the chat box, and assuming that there's enough time, we'll try and get to them. We'll pay attention to the questions. Also, to keep the conversation somewhat interactive, and given the number of people who are in the audience today, we thought that we could ask some questions to you in the audience, and that would help our panel to frame their response to the questions we're going to be discussing. So, looking at the screen, I believe if you go to, there's a polling tab. If you click on the polling tab, you'll see our first question, which we'd love to know who's in the audience today and get an idea as to how many years of experience each of you have. And when you click your response, you should immediately see the response of everyone else. So now I just got to figure out how to move to the next slide, which is always a challenge. Let's just go into here, and I should be able to scroll down. Did I get the next slide? Do you see that?
You do.
Okay, awesome. So that was supposed to already, I was supposed to already show that slide, so I'm going to go to the next one. First question to discuss today: why is measurement such an important yet challenging topic for internal communications? David, what do you think about that?
Oh, I get to start off. Hey.
You get to start off. Sorry, I hope I didn't shock you.
Well, let's start with the important part. I think one of the most important reasons is that data positions you as an expert, right? It helps you move from that person with an opinion about communication, and there are lots of them. It helps you move from that person with an opinion to the expert and that strategic advisor. So I think that's one of the critical things. Why is it challenging? I think there's a lot of things that we have in our minds. Too time consuming, too expensive, hard to figure out, perhaps too mathematical. Many of us are thought, we got into this because we're creative, and we didn't think we'd have to get into this mathematical space. But guess what? It's part of our the hats we wear.
Great.
Neil, Priya?
Go ahead, Neil.
Okay, sure. You've unleashed me now. Okay. Yeah, look, when we were preparing for this panel, we came back to that question, right? Why are we still talking about this? Why is it that we're still grappling with measurement? And I think the truth is that as a profession and as a function, we are still grappling with this. I see that it very much like Jeff talked about at the top. We're evolving. It's no longer the case. I think that we're asking that question about whether we should measure. I think as David just said, it's absolutely part of the job. I think that the challenge that we've got today is, now that we've got the data, what is it that we do with it? And, you know, the various studies that are out there, not least of which the State of the Sector report, shows consistently that there's a big chunk of the communication professional community that are not measuring effectively. So we haven't nailed this. We haven't nailed this. And I think one of the main reasons that I see as to why we're still grappling with measurement is that most organizations are not asking us to. I know that there are probably many people on the call that maybe don't recognize that because they work in organizations that really value communication measurement. But I've got a strong suspicion that many people work in organizations that don't. And they're either not asking us to measure at all because they don't know that they should, or if they know that they should be asking us, they might not know what to expect from communication measurement. So that's sort of, to me, the challenge, I think, that sort of puts this conversation into context. But, you know, again, unless you're doing the measurement, unless you're able to tell the story about the contribution that internal communication is making to the business, unless you know how the investment in the output of the communication function is impacting the strategy of an organization, I feel like you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice and a disservice to the function and profession more broadly. So it's something that we really do need to get right.
You said that so politely, Neil, you know, as the Englishman you are. I think, you know, ultimately we measure what matters. Executives and leaders, this is the language of leadership. Everything they do when you're sitting at that table, if you've had the privilege of sitting at that table, is all about results. It's all about accountability. And I think that's what's challenging for internal communications, that we're used to being behind the scenes. I think we need to believe in ourselves before we get anybody else to believe in us. And we need to be comfortable being accountable for the impact that we have potential to have on the organizations that we're working with. And that has to be bottom line driven, because that, again, is the language of leaders.
You know, and there's a lot of chat going on right now, which is really amazing. So please, definitely, audience, keep it coming. And I'm just going to kind of go off script because I can't help myself, but I promise I'll get us back to what we promised to, what we've been talking about for so long. But one of the questions was, you know, what do I measure? You know, and then there was a comment about, you know, benchmarking. What do you all think about that? I mean, that does kind of take us to our next question, but before we get to it, I'll throw that out there to you. What do we measure? What should we be measuring and looking at?
Go ahead, Priya.
You know, I always use Sean Williams' research. He's from the U.S. He's a professor and a communication professional, and he's published some great work along with others. So there's Sean Williams et al. And we think about the 4 things that are broken down with him if you want to go look up his information. But first, outputs. That's where we all start. It's what are we delivering? What are we actually doing? It's the newsletters, it's the stuff that we create. And that's where a lot of us stop. And that's where we make the mistake. Second, he added this piece that I'd never heard of before, which is called outtakes. It's the consumption. So when we send out the communication that we've created, how is it being consumed? Those are the clicks. Those are the people attending your events. Those are, the people who are reading your reports. Third, it's outcomes. So what are people actually doing as a result of looking at your material? So we actually want to drive action. That's the ultimate. And then, that gold is when we actually hit organizational impact. When we connect what we do with the impact on organizations, profit, cost reduction, effectiveness, you can name all of those things that matter to the organizations. That's when we really can deliver the type of internal communication that we know can impact bottom line and organizational outcomes.
Amazing. Neil, David?
Yeah, and
Go ahead, David.
Priya, thank you, Neil. I would add to this that we should be looking at satisfaction with our channels. Do employees consider them valuable, for example, worth their time? I look at knowledge of key topics. That's one of the objectives of internal communication, is to build knowledge. So how are we doing with that? And attitudes. How can we influence the attitudes? For example, I believe in the direction of the organization. And you know, in the ultimate, as Priya was talking about, is that behavior. Have we driven the behavior? I think part of the challenge is that sometimes our communication efforts are not necessarily driving a behavior, or it's not the only thing driving a behavior. So we have to be careful on that side. But you know, you put all of that together, and that adds up to the effectiveness of what you've done. Neil, you might have some more to add there.
It's building on what the two of you have already said, really. I mean, I was recently reacquainted with the Barcelona principles that are put out by AMEC. And they've now integrated this idea of impact as well, which is a new element, I think, in terms of the language around measurement. But anybody that is sort of unsure as to what this is all about, and you know, they perhaps want a framework to just kind of structure their thinking around measurement, the Barcelona principles, I think, are a really good start. But I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, my initial answer to your question, Jeff, was going to be, it depends. You know, what are the things that you need to look at? I think it's different in every organization, and it's up to you to really find the things that matter, you know, the material topics, if you will, within the organization where you as a function and you as a communication professional can really add value, and the things that only you as a function can do. That will drive what it is that you then measure, because it's not just a case of saying, okay, well, we need to be measuring all of our email traffic and email engagement as a matter of course. That might tell you absolutely nothing in relation to the organizational strategy that you're seeking to support. So it's really digging into what the drivers are and have your measurement program support that.
Any further thoughts on that, the panel? Cool. So why don't we go back to another interactive polling question, just to get an idea as to folks in the audience who actually measures and who doesn't. Let's see what the reaction is there. Do you measure your internal communications? Yes, of course I do. Or no, sadly not.
I'm taking part in these polls. I don't know if we're supposed to be, but I want to see the results, so I'm plugging my answers in as well.
Yeah, for sure. You do. You all should, please. Let's turn to the challenges of measurement and how do we get our hands around it? Who wants to go take that one first?
I can lead off on this one if you like, because for me, I think this question really digs into the thread of the whole session. I think, you know, it's all about setting yourself up to deliver for your organization, really. And for me, really good measurement starts at the beginning. It's way before measurement. You know, it's knowing exactly where you're headed and setting yourself up to see the outcomes that you need to see. So clearly that begins with a solid understanding of the business context within which you sit. And then a really razor sharp focus on the audiences that are going to enable you to achieve that outcome. So that audience and outcome focus, for me, are the two most important inputs to great measurement. Because without those, I don't think you've really got a chance of doing anything meaningful at all. You know, when people come to us as a function, they often say, you know, I need this email, or I need you to make me a video about this. You know, and we always react to that saying, well, hang on, you know, why? And it's the same with measurement. You need to step back from it in order to know what you want from it. So it's all about getting the front end of it right before you think, okay, what is it that I need to measure?
And I'd agree with that, Neil. Like, I mean, both of us have been longtime Gold Quill, IABC Gold Quill evaluators, and that importance of getting the goals and the communication objectives right up front is so integral to a winning entry. It's something we look for as strategists and leaders. You know, I always tell my reports and my teams and my clients to start with one question: what does success look like? And what does success look like cannot be the things that people usually ask for. It's not the memo, it's not the video, it's not delivering the success. It's what does that success mean to the business? Why are we doing what we are? And what's the ultimate goal? When this goes perfectly, what do you want to see happen? And once we know what that is, because we sometimes forget to ask questions, often we're order takers. The waiter who takes the order goes away and delivers, versus the person who wants to be sitting at the table and advising and consulting. And that's, just by asking the question will lead you to a completely often a different answer than what they originally asked for.
David, any thoughts?
And I'd like to, Jeff, I'd like to take the question to the people who are new to internal communication. And if you look at the poll, that's the majority of folks on this call. And I think one of the ways to get your hands around it, especially if you're new to internal communication, is to understand all of the tools, all of the research tools that you have available to you, right? Wrap your arms around that, because I think our default is our surveys. Frankly, with tools like SurveyMonkey, surveys are easy. They're easy to put out there. They're not easy to construct, but they're easy to put out there. And we have to think beyond the survey. Focus groups, interviews, e-metrics, those are the things that platforms can put out, and observation, and as well as any existing data that you may have across your organization. Those engagement surveys, for example, demographics, turnover is an interesting data point to understand your level of communication. So I think it's a good idea to get comfortable with all those tools.
What do you all think about the whole concept of surveys? One of the questions that we debated quite a bit was the magnitude and the frequency of surveys, and from where they're coming from all different parts of an organization. So much so that people maybe ignore them. Priya, you have any thoughts on the value of surveys, maybe other tools that the folks in the audience can consider to maybe get greater engagement and intention?
People often talk about survey fatigue, and I won't take credit for this, but I heard somebody say it, and I can't remember who it was, but we don't have survey fatigue. What we have is lack of action fatigue. and that's, so if you're actually asking people what they need and what they want, and then you're responding to it and having a conversation that's actionable with our stakeholders, then people are going to continue coming back and answering your surveys. The issue is that we ask them and then we do something that doesn't really matter. We choose the lowest hanging fruit. We choose the things that aren't the hard work that address the real issues. So first of all, really take a look at what you're doing with those surveys before you send out another one. But there's so many options. I like turning the surveys and the engagement surveys. Maybe it's once every couple years. If you're doing a communication audit, I usually come into organizations every 3 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit more because the tools are changing so fast. If we're doing pulses and polls, those are ways you can have conversations where people are. There's so many options to get pieces of information from people that is more conversational today than making them sit through a huge survey.
I agree with that 100%.
To build on this, and what you were saying earlier, I don't think that certainly the internal communication function should apologize for needing data just like other functions do, right? We should have access to that data and be able to perform that. Just like accounting needs its data, the HR team needs its data. We need our data too. So don't say, hey, my survey is not important. It is, but I think also if there is a survey glut in an organization, how do we control that? How do we manage it? How do we encourage other research methods? How do we run samples rather than census, so a representative sample versus the entire population? How do we ensure surveys are well designed? Priya, to what you were talking to, how do we ensure they encourage participation? And then, of course, the reporting that you spoke about.
Neil, did you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I would have said exactly the same as Priya. You know, whenever somebody says to me, we send out too many surveys, I ask them to tell me according to whom, because I think we just make this assumption that there's too many surveys going on. But actually, as Priya says, if we're doing something on the back of each one of those surveys and people know that you're going to take action, of course they're going to want to contribute. And there's lots of passionate people in every organisation that love to have their voice heard. You know, so I think it's a dangerous assumption to make that we send out too many surveys. But I do agree that there are other ways to do it. You know, some of the things that we've tried is having kind of like a survey section on the intranet, so you don't have to push anything out to anybody. You know, those that are interested in feeding in, you can just kind of have standing surveys on a site that people go to and they know that they can find. So there's pull ways of doing that as push. You know, listening groups are a really good mechanism as well. And I do want to make the point that qualitative research is just as important as quantitative. I think one of the things we're not particularly good at is really finding the place for qualitative feedback. You know, we're very comfortable with graphs and charts that show us, you know, percentages of opinion and that type of thing. And we're less comfortable, I would propose, at, you know, how to tell the story using qualitative inputs. Certainly, if we think about, you know, Gold Quill and other measures, you know, I don't think we celebrate the qualitative research as much as we do the quantitative at times. So I think that we really do need to find a place for that in amongst all of the more formal sort of quantitative stuff.
Yeah, and those informal conversations, right, Neil? The water, what's going on around the water cooler? I used to, when I worked inside organizations, I led internal communications at Canada's largest private sector employer, and just knowing who was in the know in each of the different buildings across the country, and they were usually the administrative assistant, I'd give them a call and find out how they'd react to certain pieces of news. Going to the cash register at the grocery store, because it was Canada's largest grocer, and asking them questions about a big announcement we just made, and seeing what came out of the mouths of the cashier or the butcher was amazing to know that something had landed and how it had landed. You know, it was just there's a lot of ways to create relationships, and that's something that's really important for you know, spending a day with a truck driver and really realizing what's on their mind. Those things, that qualitative information that you can really get that sentiment analysis in a different way, is so exciting. And then I think we're going to see big changes with algorithms. Like, we talk about AI, we talk about what's coming. There's ways that those machines can analyze what's being said in social channels. Why can't they do it internally for us as well? I think there's big things that are going to start happening with that sentiment analysis, and for us to get a pulse of what's going on.
David, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I certainly think that, Priya, you're on to something there, certainly, because when it comes to qualitative, that's one of the challenges, of course, is analyzing that data. So how do you automate that? I think it's a really interesting prospect. You know, I really like to think of the quantitative data as my diagnostic tool, and then that focus group, that interview, that conversation helps me dig into the why. If I find something in a survey, an issue, then I can dig in with the qualitative. And I think it's really a nice way to look at using both as complementary.
I keep a file anytime anybody emails me on the back of something, and that I go back to, and I use that. So if we've sent something out, for example, and then somebody comes back saying, "Well, that was great," or "This message really resonated," or, you know, whatever it is that they said, I put that in a folder, and then when I need to extract that, because that's all evidential, right? You know, those are the things that kind of add up to tell that story. So even those small things make a big difference, I think.
I'm going to move us to, it's question 5, although I think it's probably a question that's going to spur a lot of conversation, because we can take it from the theoretical back down to the practical. I actually just was taking a look at, you know, the 2 questions that we've asked the audience. You know, David, you mentioned the fact that we have many new internal comms professionals that are in the audience. Just looking at the next question of do you measure your internal comms, and seeing that quite a large percentage of the folks with us today sadly do not measure their internal comms. It takes me, I want to make this a little bit more tangible for our audience, because we look at what has happened over the past year, right? And that continues to plague us with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's fair to say that while a terrible thing for sure, I just had COVID, it was awful. That is also in the fact that many people are working remotely now, that it's also elevated the stature and the importance of internal communications within organizations, and all eyes are really on internal comms to help guide the way. The one thing that I think about is, okay, like any crisis, eventually and hopefully sooner than later, the pandemic's going to go away. What happens next? And, if I'm a new professional in internal comms, what should I be thinking about? What tools should I be considering? Everyone has email. Okay, so we can measure email, and there's a bunch of chat about email going on today. But, what are your thoughts on us maintaining our position and not letting this opportunity of the pandemic just kind of fade into the sunset?
What internal communication professionals around the world have been saying is, through COVID, what they got was increased access to executives, more access than they would have done earlier because of the importance and the changing nature of communication that needed to happen. But we also heard that they were running on a hamster wheel. So they were mostly reacting versus being proactive. They were reacting to the situation as it came, and they're still doing that. And now they're doing the same to get back to, hybrid workplaces or whatever that next is. And it's just felt like they're running very hard. I would love to see internal communication professionals be very proactive in this process before they lose the access, so that they can have the right conversation. So on my website, it's innerstrengthcommunication.com. On the resources section, I've got a debrief form. I first ask all communication professionals to write down everything that they've done and what were the impacts of what they've done. If they haven't done it already, start doing it now. Because when somebody says, "What did you do?" you want to have that available to you, and you want to have that tracked. So you're not talking just about volume, you're also talking about the value of what you delivered and what impact it had. And then finally, I want you to focus on three things. One, it's platforms, right? So what are the platforms and the technologies you would love to have that are going to make the next time, and there will be a next time, better? Who are the people that you need around the table? And what are the processes? So we heard, so when I say people, it's, do you need more resources yourself? Who needs to be around the table who is missing? And when I talk about process, it's the approval processes we heard about. How do we make that easier next time and increase the trust? So think about that very proactively. And when you come to them with a methodology and say, this is my debrief of it, and this is how we can do better next time, at least you had the conversation, and hopefully you were able to make progress on one of those things.
I would add to what Priya just said there. I think that the extent to which people can take something forward from this past 12 plus months is the extent to which they've been measuring already. Like Priya said, this is not something that you only do at the end. This is something that you need to be doing constantly throughout, and throughout the pandemic, as we saw our position in organizations elevate, I was keeping everything crossed that people were tracking and measuring as they go, because who remembers what they did 12 months ago from today, and who remembers what the measurement even should have been back then. So it really needs to be something that you're dealing with every single day. And there's a great, I came across a great formula for this in the CIPR's recently published Guide to Measurement. And it's analytics plus storytelling equals influence. And I think to the question about what people can, what they can leverage and how they can take that forward, I think if they've got the analytics, they're telling the right kind of story, then they will continue to have that influence that they might have gained over the past 12 months.
Yeah,
David,
I think, Neil, it's having that. Yeah, I think Neil, it's building on what you just said. It's having that data in your back pocket so that you can influence others, such as leaders, and even when no one is asking for it. So, bringing that pulse of the organization. I think there's also potential to partner with other groups around gathering data, such as HR, IT, et cetera. Come together as a coalition to make change and make recommendations. I think that often has a big influence because there are so many things that influence the employee experience. And when you bring those things together, it makes it stronger.
I'm taking a look at some of the Q&A, and there's some amazing questions that are coming in. There's one that struck my attention that I want to throw out there to the panel. And I think this really does help to, kind of tie together outcomes versus the tactics to achieve those outcomes. So the question comes from Kerry McDonald. Kerry asks, when looking at outcomes like turnover and productivity, how can you know and show that changes are a result of internal communication strategies versus other factors, for example, work-life balance, organizational policies, et cetera? I think it's a great question. What do you all think about that?
I really like the way that Caroline Keeley talks about this. Caroline describes this as making yourself comfortable with this notion of directional alignment. Mm-hmm. So it's very unlikely that we will ever be able to tie 100%, with 100% certainty and conviction that it was because of internal communication that this then happened. So therefore, we need to be comfortable with the fact that we've contributed to it. And I don't think that we should shy away from that. Making a contribution to an outcome or an impact is significant. I think we get hung up on the fact that, okay, well, I can't prove it, so therefore I'm not going to own it. And we must resist that temptation, because we absolutely have to take our place and take some of the credit.
Absolutely. And it's asking sometimes that's, sorry, were you going to say something, David? I don't know.
Go ahead.
Okay. Asking the question about what would happen if we said nothing. I think that there is, it's really important to I believe, I have seen this to be true, that internal communication is an integral enabler of organizational success, period. That's against programs. That's against entire organization's direction. That's what I've seen in my career. And when we do that very proactively and strategically, we have contribute to the organization's bottom line results. So, really think about what's the role and what's the gap you're serving, and have that conversation out loud. Mm-hmm. So, because we sometimes do it silently behind the scenes and expect people to notice the work we did, but we don't actually show people what we did. And people intuitively get it. Yeah. They know we help them be aware, understand, do, believe. And we created those things to make that happen. So be part of that conversation. Sorry, Jeff.
No, I was going to, David wanted to say something.
Just to pick up on what Neil was saying around how challenging it can be to make this correlation. We increase internal communication, and then therefore this happened. So I like to think of it as, Carrie mentioned work-life balance as an outcome. Okay, how can we isolate how internal communication contributes to that? I'd like to think about what are the parts that help us achieve work-life balance, as an example, and among those elements, how can internal communication influence and help, and therefore I can measure that. So I can make some correlations there. I can't impact the entire thing, but I can figure out where I can isolate and contribute. So I like to break things down and demonstrate the connection.
Priya, I want to come back to one of the things you said, which, you know, in terms of, we know that the work we do is important, and we make the assumption that everyone knows that the work we do is important. I've seen in a lot of organizations that isn't always the case. So to kind of take it on a more, like, if I had to go back to my office tomorrow, knowing how that my work is so important and valuable, what specifically can I do or should I do to make sure that my senior manager, that the C-suite, that the CEO really understands that there is a direct correlation between the work that we're doing in internal communications and, say, the fact that the company is performing so much better this year, or that turnover in employee retention is higher? What can I practically do to make sure that doesn't go unnoticed?
You know what? It's act like a consultant, I think, in a little way, because on the outside, for those of us who are consultants, and I was in-house for 20 plus years. So I really understand where a lot of you are coming from. It was really starting with a plan. What am I going to do to help you? Here's my contribution, providing updates along the way of what we did while we measured it. And then at the end, debriefing what we did, what we delivered, what the impact we believed it was, and what we would do better next time. It's that continuous improvement process, and really thinking full circle. The other thing is, one of the things that's was always unique for me, is I came to communication from a science background. So with a background in analytics and research, which was very unusual. I was alongside a lot of people who were there from journalism. And it was always an advantage for me, because I love conducting science experiments. I get to do that in businesses all the time. So think about COVID as this perfect experiment. When we contribute and when we add value and when we do things with COVID, look at the impact we're having. This is what we've accomplished. Now, if we can apply those same principles to other key projects in the organization proactively, imagine what's possible. So it's having those conversations and finding that one leader who's willing to try something different, because there's always multiple initiatives going on in an organization. Pick one and show them what you can do with that. And this is what I did at Loblaw. So that was the company I used to work for, where I grew that team from 2 tactical people to 17 dedicated to internal communication. And it's a strong strategic team today. And it's because, and they're part of every conversation, because we started helping a few random initiatives and everybody wanted that same result. And it almost got to a point where we had to say no to the initiatives that simply didn't matter, because we only worked on the priorities based on our resources. So really think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Pick one business unit, say, and choose them as your partner and show success there, and then the domino effect should come into play, right?
And talk about it. Learn to brag.
Yeah, that's
right.
It. I would have two suggestions. The first one would be, know exactly what each piece of content is designed to do. So know before you click a button, before you post, or before you send, or whatever it is, before you publish, know exactly on the way in what it's designed to achieve. That will facilitate both your measurement and also make you feel better about the fact that you're only putting content out that is designed with a purpose. So I think that's my one idea. The second suggestion is really identify where you can support the business. Where is the business headed? Where is the organization headed? And is the content that you're about to publish or put out there, is that helping in any way? Because if it's not, it's probably not the right work to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. David, any thoughts there?
Well, I'll bring it back to measurement, and I have a very simple philosophy to certainly help people get started, which is, one, gather your data, get out there and get some data, Second is know it. It should be in your back pocket. You should be able to cite it. 86% of employees X, 70% of employees Y. You should know that data. And then finally, the concept of sharing it. And this might be the biggest one, because when you share it, you create knowledge of what employees' preferences are, what their information needs are, and that goes a long way. And I think this idea of sharing helps you pinpoint how do you want to influence folks with data. Is it a leadership team? Is it a set of business people? Is it the HR team? And when you make decisions like that, that helps you influence down the line how you'll collect the data, what you'll collect. So I think if you just think of that gather, know it, and share it, it'll get you started and learn to love measurement, right, Priya and Neil?
The other thing I always say is take credit for what doesn't happen. Right. So one of the things,
Right.
when we do our job really, really well, sometimes the result is the crisis was averted, a limited disruption. The business results were great, regardless of the disruption and the change that was happening. Right. So I always have that conversation again up front with what are we afraid of will happen if we don't get this right? And then take credit for it at the end, because I believe it makes a difference. People who are informed manage through change a lot more effectively than those who are not, right? So have those conversations of what could happen,
Agreed.
and then take credit for when it doesn't.
One of the things that I've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, in working in internal communications technology is, and having consulted with many companies on how to implement successfully a solution like a staff-based, say, we're dealing specifically with the internal comms professionals, and it's amazing to me how many times I've gone into large organizations where they aren't fully aware of the different personas, the different types of people, the different communications needs of all the employees, and what works best for a particular type of employee in terms of maybe the channel for communications or the type of communications. What has your experience been in terms of the success of internal comms in really being almost a convener and educating the C-suite, say, on who their employees are and what their needs are, and what tools that we should be providing to them to be most effective in our work?
I don't know if we're necessarily educating the C-suite. The C-suite has a lot of stuff that's going on. They want to know that we're delivering on the plan, and that we're an integral part of that. I would provide the high level information. For instance, it's amazing how many people want to come and say, these are the number of newsletters we sent out this year. The C-suite's not necessarily concerned about that.
Right.
They are concerned about the organizational impact and the projects we supported and helped move forward so that they were delivered smoothly, right? So it's thinking about what you're talking to them about is really important. I just think, sorry, go ahead, Neil.
Sorry, no, Priya, go ahead, please.
I completely lost track of my thought.
Sorry. Okay, well, I'll jump in then. I mean, one of the things that we've done at ERM is really to try and help people in senior management understand, when we need a message on strategy, then these are the most effective ways of doing that. So over time, we build up this raft of analytics that help us to suggest, okay, if it's something where we need to drive a behavior change, then this is what is helpful. So I think, kind of like Priya, I don't see it necessarily as like an education program. It's more how do we make our unique contribution in support of what the organization is trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think we often play the role of reminding these folks, reminding leaders. As an example, I was working on a project, and the senior leadership team said, okay, we communicated enough about that, we can stop now. Well, it turns out that if you look just at the demographic data in a particular division, there was as much as 30% turnover. So if we stopped, that meant that roughly a third of this group wouldn't have heard about the initiative. So that was, and we had to remind them, don't forget, you've got people at a high turnover in this particular group. So we need to do a little more here. So I think we play this role of helping keep it top of mind of what's important.
Yeah. And ultimately, the reason we use personas and stakeholder relations, or whatever we call it today, is so that we are not going out there with one size fits all solutions and messaging. We're really targeting the information we need to the right people at the right time in order to have the right outcome.
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's what strategic is.
Right, and that's critical, totally.
And it's amazing, like with all the platform companies that I talk to, people will buy the platform, but they're not necessarily using all of the things that are available in order to create that targeting and personalization and customization that can happen in these tools. And it's really important that we learn what's possible, because I don't think we're using the tools we have as effectively as we can.
And that's where, you know, we've actually seen it, Steffi. So I've been spending considerable time looking at, you know, the correlation between targeting of content and really thinking about what the individual needs, and seeing the levels of engagement that result when you actually do target the content and think about the individual. It's considerable. We have a few minutes left. There's a question that I've been wanting to ask, and I think it's a perfect way for each of you to kind of give a little summary of your thoughts on this important topic of measurement. And it comes from an anonymous person. What are the key 4 to 5 internal comms pillars that are a must for every organization? Sometimes we end up doing too much and diluting the overall effect. So maybe if each of you could think about that, I'll repeat it again, but if you can each give us one of your pillars that are a must for every organization to do without diluting the overall effect and importance of our role in internal communications.
One of the tools in the resources, I think somebody shared it in the chat, the resources section on my website, there's also something called the impact matrix. And essentially what it says is, here's all the resources that we need to spend time and money, and this is the impact it has on the organization. And I encourage communication professionals to track what they're doing on that impact matrix. And you want to be on the right-hand side. You want to be on the things that are high impact. And the things that are high impact, low resource are your quick wins. They're things that are easy to do. The things that are high impact, high resources are your investments. If you're on the left-hand side, which means it's low impact and you're spending a lot of money or a lot of time, that's a waste of your time and a waste of your money. So really, really think about what you're doing and tie it to the organizational priorities. And then think about how much time you're spending on the things that don't matter, so that you can get rid of those slowly. You know, it might be an evolution to do that, so that you can focus on the things that do, because that's what's going to lead to the resources and the seat at the table and the conversations and the access that you want to have.
Great. David or Neil?
Jeff, if I can jump in, I would say that certainly one of them, and this has been mentioned along the way, are having solid objectives that are tied to what the business is trying to achieve. And let me give you an example to bring that to life. So an example of an objective that I sometimes hear is, I want employees to be excited about this change initiative. That's not an objective. The objective should be very specific. The objective is 99% of employees are aware of this change initiative. 87% of managers understand what to do. Stuff like that. So being specific and having really solid view of what needs to be achieved, I think sets you up for success. Neil.
Amazing. Neil.
I was going to say the same kind of thing as David, so I'll just perhaps just nuance it a little bit. Because I think that it depends, right? Without being a flaky panelist here, like the answer to that question is going to depend on the organization that you're in. But I think that there's 2 ways of looking at your contribution to the organizational priorities. There are the things that you can only do as a communication function because you own or control the ways and means of doing that, whether that's the channels or the messaging or what have you. So think about the things that only you can do because you're the communication function. And then think about the things that you can do in support of others that own other parts of those organizational priorities. So for example, if there is a huge change initiative that is probably being driven by another part of the organization. So what is it that you can do to make them successful, and plug yourself into that and make your unique contribution there. But throughout all of that, it's having in mind the objectives that David just talked about, and knowing exactly where you're headed. I think that's absolutely essential.
Awesome. So I'm looking at the clock and we're 1 minute over our time. I just want to say thank you to Priya, to Neil, to David. It was really amazing, a lot of fun spending time with you, engaging in this discussion. It's certainly an exciting time in our industry, and it was really a pleasure. So thank you very much for your time and for being here today. Jess, I think I turn it back over to you now. Hope everyone has a great conference.